the button.
Well, hey there, everybody. It is Wednesday night, 8 p.m. for some of you. For some of us, it's still the middle of the afternoon. Welcome to Gun Cranks Live. I am Guns Magazine editor Brent Wheat, and I'm reporting to you live from on the road, as is Tom McHale. And there's our boss, Roy Huntington, holding down the fort in the central Midwest. Hello, gentlemen. How's it going?
That's right. It's a dirty job, and so I want someone else to do it.
Yeah. Well, you probably hear my audio is a little different. I'm using the old earphones and all that because I really didn't want to haul about 50 pounds of gear with me. But I'm reporting to just you, just the Gun Crank audience, live from Gunsight in Paulden, Arizona. Actually, I'm sitting in my friend Ken's study, surrounded by all kinds of cool gear. And check this out. We're talking about the Weaver stance. That's a poster of Jack Weaver right behind me, and it's signed.
I was going to ask you why you have a gun control poster over your right shoulder.
It's the gun control for the good reason.
Exactly. Gun control is hitting your target. So we're going to talk about the Weaver stance. And it's funny when we've been having these conversations, we try to hit something that's a little contentious that people talk a lot about, and there's a lot of misinformation. I nominate this topic may be probably the top of that heap in terms of a lot of misinformation and folks that just flat don't know what they're talking about. So, the Weaver stance, if you're not familiar, was originally brought to light by a guy named Jack Weaver, and Colonel Jeff Cooper from Gunsight really popularized it. And for the longest time, it was the only thing. And now there's a lot of shooters that think the Isosceles, or there's a few other ones out there. But the problem I have, having shot that way for years, having been to Gunsight more times than I could count, and being a firm believer in it, there is so much misinformation about it. And with that, Roy, you've gotten a lot of information about the Weaver stance. How did you come about learning about it?
I'm not the only guy who could say this, right. But when I was talking to Jack about it, it was, I know, that was a big name drop. Some years ago, in the early 2000s, I discovered Jack was still alive. I honestly did not know that. And I stumbled onto a website offering that very poster you have behind you there. And so I thought, holy cow. So I called a number and I got Jack's son and I said, is Jack still alive? And he said, oh, yeah. And so he hooked me up. And then over the next few weeks, Jack and I had some great conversations. And it was absolutely astounding for an old gun crank like me, because I grew up with Weaver. I trained Weaver in the police department. I mean, it was legendary. We used to read about the leather slap and all those guys. And so here I was talking to him. And so we went up and down every possible thing you could think of. And eventually I sent our writer, Jeremy Clow, there. Jeremy spent a couple days with Jack, took some video, which we'll have a link when we're done. And then came back and wrote an absolutely marvelous feature for American Handgunner with pictures of Jack demonstrating the Weaver stance in his backyard. And I had to laugh because it's like, shut up. Here's the picture. This is Jack.
This is what's the right stance.
Yeah, I mean, here it is. Now, there may be other people who say that I shoot a variation of the Weaver or something like that. But if you really want to get nuts about it, there it is. And so now we can talk about other things if we want to.
Well, talking about all this misinformation out there, I think that's probably point number one is you get some folks who say it has to be exactly this way, angled certain way, your body at 42.6 degrees and that's absolutely not true. And Jack Weaver himself said that. We're all built different. We've all been broken and bent over the years in different ways. So you have to adapt. Basically what Jack Weaver was doing was not coming up with a dogmatic approach. He was coming up with a fighting platform that worked real well, and it has.
Well, the funny thing about that, though, is that the whole point was getting away from one-handed handgun shooting. I mean, that was so revolutionary about it, right?
Well, and
he said, hey, if I use my other hand, I can kind of pull my gun up to the same place every time, without looking.
Yeah. It was as simple as that. He told me, he said, I was watching all these guys shooting from the hip and shooting one-handed, and everyone was missing the target. And he said, I just thought, well, why don't I use two hands and bring the gun up far enough that I can see the sights? He said, so I did it, and everyone was like, oh my God, well, what's he doing? You know, because that was
well, they laughed at him, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah, that was socially not appropriate at all. Real men only shoot with one hand, you know, that kind of stuff. And except he started winning matches. And so he actually still lost afterwards. I mean, some of these guys, Thel Reed, people like that, were good, and so they beat Jack, you know, regularly. Except overall and more consistently, he found that that was a more reliable thing. And like he never said, he said, I never said I'm the first guy to shoot a handgun with two hands at all. He said, maybe I'm the first guy that did it in this kind of a match, you know. Yeah. And he was also quick to say, Jeff was always kind, because he said Jeff always attributed it to him. And he said, you know, a lot of people misinterpret Jeff and think that Jeff invented everything. And Jeff was always quick to say, what did he call himself? The great documenter.
Yes.
Yeah.
Basically, you know. But boy, if you want to start a fire today, though, just say Isosceles or Weaver.
Yeah. And I don't understand that. It goes back to, we say this every single show, but what Tom said, shooters are so binary. If you shoot that way, you're a dummy. Or if you shoot this way, you're a dummy. And those that have got a little more experience under their belt, a little snow on the roof, you realize that there's, you know, certain ways that work best for you. And we were laughing before we went live, you know, we know Robbie Latham, world champion, multiple world champion. And by certain standards, he does everything wrong. But it's kind of hard to argue with his results. So, you know, if you just don't like the Isosceles or the Weaver, that's okay. But it's really not something that ought to come to blows in a bar. And I've almost seen that happen.
Well, they both have their points. I mean, you look at, it depends. What are you trying to do? And what are you natural with? What are you comfortable with? You know?
Yeah.
I think Isosceles seems to still dominate the competitive circuit, but that's not the only application, right? In the law enforcement world, Weaver's been a dominant trained thing for decades, right?
Well, I think it's kind of a bit of however you were first trained. But I know shooting, let's talk a little bit about the Weaver, maybe just, you know, what is a Weaver? Because there are some people who may not have any idea what that is, but basically take an isosceles stance. And so, you know, point your toes at the target, your right foot's just behind your left foot, if you're right-handed, your right toe's about even with the back of your left heel. You want your ears in front of your shoulders in front of your hip, and your waist bent forward slightly, and basically put both your arms out in front of you and grasp the gun. Now bend both your elbows a little bit, and now you're in a Weaver. And then if you straighten both of your arms, now you're in an isosceles. It's really
them's fighting words right there.
Well, I know.
They're making them sound almost the same.
I think people, they misunderstand that. They don't realize that actually they're virtually the same, except for the fact that one's arms are bent and one's arms aren't bent. But what I found, and Brent, you maybe will agree with me or not, I think you will, I found that if you're actually covering a suspect at gunpoint and your right elbow is bent and you're slightly, and your left elbow is bent down, your peripheral vision allows you to see more of the suspect's body. And you can see their hands, and you can see, you know, as they start to move. Whereas if you've got both hands out in front of you, and if you're listening to this or watching this, put both of your arms straight out in front of you as if you're holding a handgun and you know, pointed at something like that. You'll see that your forearms actually block your view of the torso, you know, substantially. And I don't know, Brent, tell me about that. I mean, how bad do you want to see those hands?
Well, exactly. That's what's going to hurt you. And, you know, I got to say that I don't want to take our industry to task, but I'm going to take our industry to task, because I think some of this is gun writer controversy, because I was getting a tiny bit homicidal when I was doing a little bit of research before we went on, because I just wanted to make sure I was, you know, refreshed in all this. And some of the stuff that people are claiming is a disadvantage to Weaver, they're just flat wrong. And I look at their bylines, and frankly, it's folks that I don't think are very experienced. And it looks to me like they're trying to support their position, which is isosceles is better. Okay, good for you. But you don't have to say that Weaver is bad because you're blading your body and you'll be shot in the shoulder. Well, yes, if I stand sideways like this, that's not really a Weaver stance. I think sometimes that people grasp at straws trying to figure out a way to say, because they were first trained in isosceles or whatever, well, this is the one true holy grail. And the thing with the feet, body position, all this stuff, you don't get so locked up in, well, the arm has to be at 45 degrees. I can't shoot that way. I'm like you, Roy. I bend my arms. Okay. This one is not straight. My strong side arm is not straight as a ramrod, as some people say it has to be a Weaver stance. That's just not true. It's what works comfortably for you. And the bottom line is, do it enough that you know that in a situation where you got to shoot, you can do it effectively. But the other thing with this Weaver stance is it is a great fighting platform, contrary to what the naysayers will say. You can move, as you said, Roy, you can cover and see. I just can't. I've tried isosceles, and it's probably mental, because I am a little mental, but I just can't make it work for me in the situations where I was pointing guns at people.
We got to actually back up a second, because there is one important thing that we missed for people that might be new to the whole Weaver versus isosceles, and that's the support hand roll. Mm-hmm. It's not just bent elbows, and I know you guys know this, but there's also that support hand is actually pulling back, towards the body on the platform. And if you really want to get it right, it's 64% optimal isometric offset pressure from support arm.
Say that 3 times fast.
No, I said that with a straight face, and I'm thinking you might have bought it. Did you buy that?
Well,
it sounded factual, right?
But I know you too well, so I believe hardly anything you say.
But in all seriousness, there is the concept of push forward with the strong arm and pull backward with the support, and that's where you get your structure, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. When I teach people, and if they're struggling a little bit, I always tell them, hold the gun firmer, and then as soon as I say push pull, then they kind of, you can see and they go, oh, and I mean, it's really a bit of a moment for them, I think. With we were talking about variations of the Weaver and stuff, and I had only learned just today that there's something called the Chapman Weaver. Mm-hmm. And that is where the right hand, the hand that supports the gun, or your left hand, depend, that arm is dead straight. And if you see the old photos of Ray Chapman, the world's first world champion in IPSC, you'll see that his head is hard down on his bicep, and he's sighting right down a straight right arm. But boy, his left arm's really bent well, kind of in support.
Mm-hmm. And again, obviously it worked pretty good for him, but I wouldn't personally teach somebody else to do it unless that just seemed like it was going to work for them. And that's what I just, again, my overarching thing here is the Weaver's got a lot of positives for it. I can see some benefit to the isosceles, but try them out both, especially if you're a new shooter. And see if one works better than the other. But I'll always default back to Weaver because I haven't seen a situation where it didn't do what I needed it to do. And I don't see why I need to learn a different way of doing it, because that's the hot thing of the moment.
See, I find myself, I'm kind of in between. I can't claim either.
I meant to talk to you about
or
that.
Weaver. I know you guys are easy there. Hey, this is.
Can I interrupt you? I'm sorry to do this, but I want to make a quick cameo. That's Louie. Hey, Louie.
Hey, Louie.
Nice.
We've never had a dog on the show. Now we've had a dog on the show. You need to bring Scout the Wonder Dog. But anyway, I'm sorry I interrupted.
Next time.
So you were saying, Tom?
No, I was just saying, I think we get all wrapped around the axle over perfect isosceles and perfect Weaver and all this business. And I actually, mine's somewhere kind of in between, if I'm honest about it. When I go to Gunsight, they kind of look at me and they go, it's not what we teach, but it seems to work for you. And it goes on to the next person, So, but I've named it actually. And I think it's going to take off and be big. It's called Point the Fiery End of the Damn Gun Downrange and Shoot. Now, if you want to shorten it, that's a lot of words. So just call it PFEGDSS. That's easy to remember. So you'll be seeing that in all the rags. So
I think you invited him on the show too. I don't recall inviting him on the show. There was a Greek philosopher in the 2000 years ago, and he said, to paraphrase, he said something like, give me the boy until 8 years old and I'll give you the man. And what he was meant by that is the fact that your training is established. I mean, a lot of your personality, a lot of the way you think and everything, is it nurture or nature? Well, I think Weaver versus Isosceles is probably mostly nurture, meaning whatever person first taught you how to shoot and said, no, stand up better and put your hands like this and put your arms out. Well, if he was an Isosceles or she was an Isosceles shooter, chances are really good that's how you shoot now. Chances are also really good if I taught you. And I tend to show people both ways, whichever one they like is the way we shoot from now on. But Clint Smith says something really good. In his class, he holds his hands up. He says, see this hand? He says, everybody has one and they're all the same, except they're also all very different. And I think since we're all that, like I think, Brent, did you say you end up broken and bent and your back hurts and things like that? So all of these are constantly fluid and being adapted.
Well, you raised a point, or Tom did, I can't remember. I've always had a kind of a rule of thumb. If somebody names a technique after themselves, I would be highly suspicious of that. Any of the mainstream techniques we have today, somebody else named them. Jack Weaver didn't say, I call this the Weaver stance. So there are, we all know, especially in YouTube land, there's a lot of guys that have come up with the Bill Smith ultra shooting system.
How about the center axis relock? Have you? No, in all seriousness, have you tried that yet? I tried it for a story I did once, and I hated it. It was miserable for me. But
well, once again, well, I think it's everyone looking for a miracle. It's like the miracle bullet, the miracle gun, the miracle. You fill in the blank. It doesn't matter. Miracle holster. Miracle laser, miracle flashlight, and there isn't a miracle stance. And I think especially it's like people talk about using your sights. Well, front sight press. I honestly, in all of the years I was a policeman, I only actually really remember looking at my sights one time to where I actually took a really precise sight picture. Otherwise, I was just kind of looking through the sights, at the bad guy. And I think stances are the same way. It's like if I start to compete and I want to try to I'm going to practice my Weaver stance with the first chain of event, that means I have to shoot twisted or with the gun down low or anything. It's all that goes out the window.
Or moving.
So, or moving. Yeah.
And that for any stance. I'm not picking on Weaver.
Yeah. Well, that's what I was going to get into. A true isosceles is straight on, feet parallel. And most people aren't really shooting that way anymore. But that was one of the problems I had with it is, as you know, Roy, you're clearing a trailer that's full of junk and there's, suddenly a guy pops up behind the couch or whatever, and you're standing on top of a chair. In a fight is such a dynamic situation. You are, and we know this, but it's really absolutely true. You're never square on, everything is 70 degrees and perfect sunlight and all this, you're tripping, you're falling. I remember one time a guy popped up with a knife, and as I went to pull my pistol and I kind of stepped back, I tripped. So I'm basically laying on the ground, and that's one of those moments where how many guys have practiced shooting up from your back? I mean, it's
perfect Weaver on your back.
Exactly.
You got to name that.
I didn't have to.
What are you going to call it?
Yeah.
You know what it is? That's the Weaver second cousin twice removed stance. I think that's what that one is.
There you go. I can patent it. I can do a shooting school.
Write a book.
I'm made.
Name it after yourself. You said something that's really, really important, though, and I don't want us to gloss by it, is that when I'm showing a novice shooter how to shoot a handgun, and you just hand it to him. Now, I use a dummy gun, one of the blue ring guns, for initial teaching. And if you hand it to him and I say, okay, hold this gun like you're going to shoot it now. Well, they do just what you say. It's invariably an isosceles. It's invariably facing the target directly, both feet just next to each other, usually a little too close together. And then, especially with women, for some reason, their shoulders back a little bit. And so their waist kind of at the back. But what I like to do then is I always say, okay, now we're going to pretend you're going to shoot the gun. And I reach up, and what I do is that I just give it a good whap at the front of the muzzle. And they always end up taking a half step back, right? And so you say, well, what had happened then if you shot your gun? It would have thrown you off balance. And the only thing I have them do is move their strong foot, be it their right or their left, back that little half step, and then do just what they say in the Weaver, which is, and the Isosceles, throw your shoulders forward a little bit, put your ears in front of your shoulders, favor forward with your waist. And then when I hit the gun like that, they just sit there and take it. Yeah. And I always love the look on their face because their eyes get big and they go, oh. Yeah.
That's the key part of any good stance, though, is and I explain it a little differently than you do, but it's exactly the same concept. It's like collarbone in front of your belt buckle, period. Start there. And then we can worry about the details, but you're right, that there's that natural, I'm leaning back.
Oh, sorry, your head.
Tom, your face disappeared there.
Yeah, your head disappeared there for a second. That's what happens when you don't shoot Weaver.
Your face will disappear.
That's right.
I'm remote today too. Can you tell?
Yeah.
I think in gun crank spirit, though, I think we all three are on the same page on this, and which is we really don't want this to turn into any kind of a fight out there. And that I mean, if people want to make YouTube videos and say those gun cranks are stupid idiots because they know that they don't know that the Isosceles is best or whatever, is that I think we're all just simply saying, here's the reality of what the positions are like. How do you build one? They're virtually identical, other than the Weaver has a little bit bent elbows. But we're strong advocates that everyone simply does the one that works best for them, and stop yelling and fighting with your friends.
And I don't have a problem with Isosceles at all. I'm probably shoot a little closer to that than Weaver, but it's option A, Weaver, you're using muscles and flex to lock up. Option B, you're using bone structure. If you're doing a classic locked elbows Isosceles, I mean, there's just apples, oranges, pros and cons to each method.
I think if you go to any classic gun site and you look down the row, and then you'll see Isosceles, Weaver, and some variations of their own inventions and all these other things, and maybe a guy in a wheelchair and maybe a lady who's got one crutch, and they're all shooting. And the thing that I always am amazed by is that a lot of times they're all shooting really well. And so that's why I think we just have to really encourage people that's not what it's about. What do we always say when people say, what's the best gun for home defense? What do you have? I have a 4-inch K-frame 38. Perfect. That'll work good. Right. And so, it's like whatever stance you're using, if it's working for you and you're consistent, you train with it, well, then congratulations.
Yeah. Well, I always laugh that, I was just at gun site literally an hour ago. I had to run in town so I get better Wi-Fi. But, people are shocked when they get to gun site and they see that, first of all, some of the instructors are carrying Glocks because, well, I thought they only carried full-size government models.
I didn't know that was allowed there.
A lot of the guys carry Glocks. And they teach they're a fighting school. And now I guess I sound like a spokesman, but I'm not. I'm just saying it's amazing to see the students' reaction that, well, I thought it was very dogmatic. You had to be this way and shoot a full-size. No, they're teaching fighting. And I would extend that to any reputable school, Clint Smith or anybody else that I would want to train under. They all recognize that kind of like here, I've seen it, heard it many, many times, is try it our way, give it a good effort, and if it works better for you, you ought to think about going to it. If it doesn't work, you'll learn something new that you're not going to use anymore, but at least you tried something. And I would say, in my experience, the ones that you can actually get to switch over to, say, Weaver and try it, they're like, yeah, this isn't bad. May have to do this. But it's about, again, keeping that mind open and listening to people that, probably have a little bit of basis for what they're saying, unlike maybe a YouTuber. But I will say, if a YouTuber with 1 million subscribers wants to call us out, please do. I fully invite that. Call us terrible things, please.
You know what I've seen happen too, and watch videos of police officers who are in a shooting confrontation. Watch, because what happens is almost always you'll see all the isosceles stances, right, as they're all pointing at the bad guy. As soon as any shooting happens, you almost always see these automatic variations of the Weaver, because what's happening is that they're getting their hands in like this so they can see. Watch.
Yeah.
Go to YouTube and watch some of these, and you'll see either that or you see them lowering their guns and like going like this, trying to look over top of their gun because they're trying to see the bad guy's hands.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
I was going to say, you were a police firearms instructor at the range for a long time. We keep saying, people always point to, well, in a real crisis, a lot of the cops go back to isosceles regardless of what they've been taught. Honestly, because most of them are bad shooters. That's the bottom line. You got, 20% that are real strong shooters, and they generally shoot Weaver. You've got the rest that come, they do their time, they make their qualification, and when things actually happen, assuming they survive it, suddenly the light bulb goes on and they start getting real serious. And I know you've seen it, Roy, I've seen it, but the majority of the guys and gals, they still just don't really take it serious until something happens that kind of gets their attention. So I wouldn't say that seeing the police in a confrontation going to isosceles is necessarily indicative of a lot of skill.
It's very good advice, because I caution people a lot, and not to disparage police officers, but if people say, oh, my buddy, he's a cop, he told me I need to buy this, and I always say, well, that's good, that's one opinion, now you need to ask a half a dozen more people. So I'd like to say one thing about when Jack demonstrated his grip for the Weaver. I'm one of those guys that if you shoot a revolver, my off thumb captures my other thumb. Well, what Jack does is he actually puts his thumb over the back of his hand behind the hammer of the revolver. And now his hands are twice as big as mine. They were just these huge hams. And so, and I never knew that until I saw the picture where he was demonstrating it for Jeremy Clow. And if you've ever shot a revolver like that, it's actually pretty enlightening. And I don't try to do it now only because I never want to try to have to retrain myself. But if I'm shooting a recoiling revolver like a Model 29 or something like that, I'll actually put my left thumb over top of my hand behind the hammer when you shoot double action. And damn if it doesn't work really good. Jack was really onto something,
Yeah.
It was just
using the muscles in both arms. How about that, huh?
Yeah, imagine
what a concept.
He was a LA County SO, and he was in charge of the range up there for years. I mean, I don't know, decades maybe, I'm not sure. And he tried to train people and stuff like that. But unfortunately at the time, he really was never acknowledged as being sort of somebody important like that. And so they finally closed the range, and then he literally hung the last sign, leaving there. So I would like to share one thing though, and that is after Jeremy Clow wrote the article about Jack, and it ran in American Handgunner magazine. I can't remember, it's 2005 or 4 or something like that. It was a nice one. I gave it a lot of room, I think 6 or 8 pages at least, a lot of real fun pictures, and there was a lot of real history there. A few weeks later, Jack's wife called me and said, I just want to let you know that our mailbox has just become overflowing with cards and letters from around the world. People saying, Jack, I had no idea that you were still around, and it was literally hundreds of thank you notes from police officers who said that because they used the Weaver stance, that's what they learned, and it worked for them, when they were in shootings and stuff like that. And so his wife said that he felt like he was a rock star. And so I was so happy to see those kind of accolades flow in for him,
Yeah. And, I think that hits another point that I want to make, that it's kind of unrelated to the Weaver stance, but I was doing a podcast today for an upcoming episode of the Guns Magazine podcast, and the person I was interviewing was talking about the history of certain things and how they happened. And if, especially our younger viewers, you really want to become a pro, a really knowledgeable shooter, it's not just about putting the bullets down. Obviously, that's the first measure of whether you can perform or not, but the really skilled person is one that can tell you about the giants whose shoulders we stand upon. So, if this is your first ever time you've heard about Jack Weaver, you need to look him up, and you need to look up Cooper, and you need to look up all these guys we've talked about, because, it's been said that John Moses Browning probably designed about 90% of all the gun stuff we still use today. And he there's a middle name, or there's a reason his middle name was Moses. So my point is, to be a well-rounded student of the gun, you need to study the history, and Jack is certainly a very important part of that history.
Well, an open mind is everything. I mean, I like to subscribe to the theory that I should be able to learn something from just about anything, at least one thing. And I mean, and when you really look closely, and I'm not standing here, espousing the Weaver or the Isosceles or anything, but if you look really closely at it, he kind of came up with the concept of pulling back on that grip with your support hand. What does that do for recoil? It makes an amazing difference controlling muzzle flip. Now, whether your look is Isosceles or Weaver, you're still probably putting a lot of pressure on the front of the grip, especially with your lower fingers, right?
Yep.
That's funny. You should say that. Brent, first of all, kudos to what you just said about history. I have a library here of about, 3,000 books. And whenever someone visits me and I say, well, here's the library, they always stop in their tracks. And then they say things like, that's just why you know that stuff, huh? It's like, yeah, you have to read the books, damn it. So, we've all been making those first look videos, and a lot of times I do a lot of shooting. We'll put a magazine or two through the pistol, and 9mm, mostly 380s, and you never know what it's going to be. But it's interesting. I've had readers say, gee, I noticed that the recoil doesn't seem to be doesn't really affect you very much. Why is that? And I tell them exactly that. And Tom is exactly right. It's that kind of push-pull thing with the Weaver versus having your arms all the way out in front of you and having the gun recoil, if you've got some kind of isosceles variation. Not saying that doesn't work, because we all know the competitors who will clean our clock.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, that's what are you going to do? What's your optimal focus, right? Mm-hmm. If your mission in life is to clean a plate rack in record time, and win that match, that is absolutely valid, man. I would probably be safe in saying isosceles all the way, right? Yeah. It's set up for that,
Mm-hmm. And I bet you guys have had the experience talking about recoil where you'll be doing maybe a one-on-one with a smaller, more diminutive person, typically a female, but my husband doesn't think I can shoot that gun because it's got a lot of recoil. If you teach them proper stance, and typically the Weaver, and they do it correctly, they're like, well, that's not bad at all. And we had a lady in one of our classes, very tiny, teeny, diminutive woman, and she was having trouble. She was shooting a full size, I forget, but it was a 9mm, and she was having all kind of trouble with it. We said, here's a 45. And she's like, oh, I've heard about these, and they kick a lot. Just try and do it. And she's like, and she ended up being the top shot in the class. So it really does make a big difference, and it doesn't matter your size. It's about technique and control.
I think while everyone lets their hair get on fire and run screaming down the road, pointing their fingers at people, I think they need to just step back and do what we encourage, which is learn, explore, talk to people, see what they do, see what works for them, see what doesn't work for them, and then apply it to yourself. And I think, well, Brent, that was a good example. That's how suddenly a 12-year-old 90-pound girl shoots a 1911 as fast as anybody. I remember 100 years ago when the bowling pin matches first became popular, at the first sort of official bowling pin competition. So that's where you clear 6 bowling pins off of a table and you have to use a handgun. Well, this would have been in the 70s sometime, and it was a brand new sport. No one really knew how to do it. Well, guess who won? Like a 12-year-old boy shooting a fully loaded 1911.
No kidding.
And he cleaned the table, and it was like 2.4 seconds, some unbelievable fast time. And he was just, shucks, gosh, I don't know. I just did what my daddy told me to do.
Yeah.
So.
Well, cool.
All right. Did we learn anything today?
Well, we learned don't get your hair on fire, because too much of that happens nowadays.
Mm-hmm. So. It's true. Hey, before we go though, let's remember though that we will post a PDF of that Jack Weaver article, and then we also have a short video that Jeremy did with Jack talking, and he's talking about the match, and he's talking about his stance, and it's just astounding. It's a bit like living history. It's really there.
Yeah. Crazy. Very cool. Well, guys, it's been wonderful. Like I said, I'm enjoying my week in Arizona. It's currently 93 here, but when I go to the airport on Friday, it's supposed to be 115 down in Phoenix. Not really looking forward to that one. It's a dry heat. You can bake brownies in your car. So, but you guys are liking this, me being on the West Coast time, because Roy, you said it might already be happy hour there in Missouri.
I'm not saying that there is an adult beverage anywhere here, but there could very well be.
There's no guns involved, so that would be okay.
No guns involved, so. Yeah.
So, well, Tom, why don't you take us out by talking about our special publications and how folks can find those?
Heck yeah, man. We got the DIY Guns. That is a gunsmithing annual book. It is now available on our website, of course, but also at Amazon.com. Ebook, print book, full color, you name it. Just chock full of good stuff. Roy will even teach you how to make your own tools in that book. Wow. So there's actually a fun article about making your own.
I forgot about that. Yeah.
To work on guns. So
let me throw a teaser out real quick, a little short teaser. We're also working on a series of books down the road that will be compilations of content going all the way back to 1955, Guns Magazine. And so if your interest is the 44 Magnum, well, we're actually going to be assembling books that you will be able to add to your library. There's that word again. And they'll be covering basically single topics. And so you want to learn about handgun hunting, you want to learn about how to reload, you want to learn about all these things, stay tuned.
Very cool.
I
was actually telling somebody that today that they said, what's new at FMG? And I said, we have got stuff rolling. I mean, that's absolutely true. We have so many new properties we're already doing, like Gun Cranks Live, and we've got so many cool things coming down the pike. It's a pretty exciting time to be us.
I'm tired. I don't know about you.
No kidding.
All right.
No kidding.
Well, then let's go.
Okay, well, let's go. Well, don't forget, check out AmericanHandgunner.com, GunsMagazine.com. Subscribe to both of our wonderful magazines. Check out the books, like Tom said, and I hope you guys have a great evening. On behalf of the Gun Cranks, Roy Huntington and Tom McHale, I'm Guns Magazine editor Brent Wheat. Now it's time to take it easy and relax. So good night, everybody.
Bye-bye, guys.